At MedStory, we take privacy seriously and follow all healthcare privacy laws. Some details may have changed to protect confidentiality. The views expressed are solely of the individual speaking and do not represent the views of their employer.
Is projected to have approximately 80,000 primary care physicians short in the entire country by 2030.
Time is the most important commodity for every single human on this earth, including doctors. And it's just not worth being miserable at a place, even if the money is good, because you can always make more money.
Welcome back to the MedStory podcast, a show where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm Spencer Locke, and on the show today, how Dr. Cynthia Chen-Joea and Dr. Peter Baum are tackling the financial systems that drive medicine and the impact that they have on the physicians themselves and the care that they provide. You may have heard this before, but a passion for helping people doesn't always align with the business of medicine. In an industry where doctors are needed more than ever, a growing number of physicians are leaving the field. For many, the financial models and the contracts they face are so demanding that they compromise the very quality of care that they want to provide. They're stuck in a system that rewards them for seeing more patients in less time, leading to widespread burnout and just the feeling of being trapped. The world of medicine has changed dramatically. Just a few decades ago, the majority of physicians were involved in private practice. Today, over 70%, and as possibly as high as 80%, are employed by large institutions, receiving a salary with performance incentives. They're given what's so-called the golden handcuffs, like a sign-on bonus or relocation stipends that tie them to the contract and make it difficult to leave if they become unhappy. Today, my guest is Dr. Cynthia Chen-Joea and Dr. Peter Baum, and they're known for their company, which is called Physician Contract Negotiation. They coach doctors on how to advocate for themselves and secure contracts that prioritize their well-being alongside their compensation. But their path there wasn't obvious. At the time, the dominant idea was simply grind until you get out of medicine and achieve financial independence to retire early. A physician's career was seen as something that was endured, not enjoyed. So Dr. Chen and Dr. Baum seemed unlikely to succeed because they were fighting against a deeply ingrained culture of self-sacrifice and people-pleasing mindsets that doctors are taught in medical school. This mindset makes them hesitant to question or negotiate the terms of their contract. But in order to understand how this story actually unfolds, we first need to understand, how do doctors actually make money?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a loaded question, I think. I would say over 70% of physicians are now employed. And so if that's the case, you're given a base salary, maybe there's some sort of RVU payment on there. In reality, there are so many different payment models that can happen when you're looking at doctors' payments, most of which has nothing to do with, I would say, medications that we prescribe, and more has to do with our skills and what we're providing for the institution. A lot of it is around the number of patients that we're seeing. I would say that's a very common model. If you're in private practice, that might look a little bit different, but when we're talking about physician contracts in that context, most of them now have to do with the physicians and us negotiating our individual contracts directly with an institution because we're being employed by them.
Okay, got it. And so, Peter, with this, is there like a top 2 or 3 type of models that the contracts can kind of bucket into, whether it's just salary or RVU-based? Can you just give us a little better understanding of what those different pathways could look like?
Yeah, I think, this day and age, Cynthia just mentioned approximately 70%, maybe it's even as high as 80% of physicians these days are employed. And so a lot of times, all physicians will get paid either straight salary, right? And that can either be malleable in the sense of like it can be related to quote unquote productivity, meaning the number of patients that people see in a day. It might not even be tied to that. It might just be regardless of the number of patients people see too. It depends on the system and the healthcare system and which one is working. So that's common. There's also RVU, quote unquote, production based, meaning that, people would be paid sort of essentially also on the number of patients that they're seeing, right? In a set amount of time over the course of the year. And sort of the more patients that people see, obviously, then the more that they get paid in general. And then, in private practice world, people have partnerships, and the payment models in that system are very different, and there's a lot more negotiation that goes on with the insurance companies in terms of like reimbursement and whatnot, or lack of negotiation with the insurance companies about how much they will reimburse for certain services that are provided.
Okay, that's helpful. So really when I'm learning this is saying a lot of it can be, incentive based, right? Like you see more patients, you make more money, which for, I would say, every job outside of medicine, it probably makes a lot of sense, but that's where there's been a lot of criticism. So Cynthia, I want to talk to you about this, is that, do you see there being potentially a conflict of interest of a doctor making more money for seeing more people, where they're incentivized to get more people in a shorter period of time compared to give higher quality care? And where's the balance with that?
It's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, both in the clinic and hospital side, I would say, in addition to the ones that Pete had just mentioned, they also have these, I guess, arbitrary metrics that someone decided would be good quality metrics, right? Like, so I'll just use the clinic as an example. The number of people you have vaccinated, or the number of people that have gotten screening mammograms that have seen you, right? So they've tied to those kinds of quality metrics, also sometimes to the bonuses potentially that you could get at the end of the year. It gets a little dicey because the idea of RVUs also was made up arbitrarily decades ago as a way, Congress made that up, or someone in legislation made that up as a way to be able to incentivize physicians to earn more money at that time. I think when you're looking at the evolution of healthcare the last decades, that is very quickly being, I think, taking advantage of, to the point now today. Any kind of RVU-based model, I think, me personally, is a direct correlation to burnout, because then more people that you're seeing in a day, it's just impossible for you to actually spend quality time with that patient to the amount of time that certain patients need in order to provide quality care. And so we're having to divide those visits, right? And doctors have come up with all sorts of ways on how to do that. 15 minutes per visit. I have to talk about X, Y, and Z during these 10 minutes. I have to give a certain amount of time to chart. When you look at the number of hours that are required in a primary doctor's day, I think there was research done on this. It's over 26 hours in a day that is required to do everything a primary doctor needs to do. That includes seeing the patient, doing your inbox, responding to, questions from patients, from administrators, trying to meet these quality metrics. It's literally more time in the day that is available. And so you're seeing a lot of doctors being very quickly burnt out. In either model, they're being pushed to see more patients on a salary based. And if they're being incentivized to see more patients on an RVU model, that can also.
I can see where doctor gets out of medical school, probably $250,000, $500,000 in debt. And they have the option where they can say, oh, I can go into this RVU model, I can make more money and hopefully pay down that debt, because that is more debt than 99% of people will have on them. And so, Peter, with you, where is the balance? How do you strike the balance with that? Because it seems like this RVU style model is a driver to maximize income potential, but at the same time, the downside is leading to overburden and burnout.
Well, I mean, I think that there's multiple factors at play here. I don't think it's necessarily only due to this, quote unquote, this RVU system that was developed by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, CMS, decades ago. I mean, right now we're facing a national doctor shortage, right? It's projected to have approximately, I think the last number I read is something like 80,000 doctors, primary care physicians short in the entire country by 2030. And so there's already an existing shortage, right? And so wait times to get seen by a physician in different parts of the country, depending on where you are, vary greatly. And sometimes it's as soon as a week or 2 or 3. And in other places, it's 3, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. You can do specialty care, it's 6 months or even a year. And so I don't think it's necessarily only related to RVUs. What you mentioned does have potentially some validity. And I just think there's so many multiple factors at play here, and the healthcare system is so complex that it cannot necessarily just be boiled down to that. And so, I mean, I can tell you right now, right? Like my schedule, I'm booking out about a month right now for patients, and there's rules and regulations by CMS that show, and quality metrics, right, for access to care. How soon can people get in for things like hospital follow-up visits, right? And ideally, they're supposed to be in a 2-week time frame, right? How soon can someone get in for their PCP for regular care? And if clinics are not meeting those metrics, right, then from the governmental regulation standpoint, then they might be out of compliance. I think your question, can you repeat your question initially to me?
Well, basically, do you feel that this RVU system, is it actually productive for the doctor and the patient as well?
It depends. I mean, I would say in general, I think it's probably contributed to higher volume, shorter visits happening. Is that good for patient care? Probably not. I don't want to be the end all and be all, right? That's my opinion. It's very difficult to address many healthcare issues within a 10, 15, 20-minute visit, which is kind of standard these days for a lot of places. And so people need to be brought back in for, follow-ups on multiple issues over time in order to address them adequately.
So, Cynthia, I want to bring this to you now because you guys both deal in the field of helping physicians decrease burnout, but then we also talk about how they can negotiate their contract. And with me, how do you strike that balance? Because of course, we all want to make more money, but if we see that big shiny object up there of this contract that's going to give me the highest income potential, but actually put me at higher risk for burning out, how would you guide someone in that situation?
I mean, not every system is going to have an RVU-based model. And I would say, like you mentioned, the newer grad coming out, right? Yes, that might look nice and shiny. In reality, I think my experience, and this is my own personal experience, is that newer grads who are just graduating really want something secure. So they tend to go for something with a higher base salary, which can be negotiable with that potentially, right, added RVU bonus incentive, X, Y, and Z on top of that. And I want to just mention that money is not always the biggest thing when we're talking about doctor salaries. We're at the highest 1%, couple of percentage income in the world. And so when we're talking about negotiation, a lot of it also, in my opinion, has to do with doctor's mindset. When we're talking about, I think before we had started this podcast, I was mentioning looking at doctors' responses through a trauma-informed lens. So if we're talking about being as one of the 4 fear responses that doctors have in terms of people-pleasing, which is part of our education background and indoctrination through medical education that comes with us when we graduate. And so when we see a contract being presented to us, we oftentimes want to people please, saying, okay, it's okay, I'm just going to sign it, because what would it mean about me? What would this say about me if I were going to question anything or negotiate anything in this contract, right? Does it mean I'm not a good doctor? I'm not a team player? Does it mean I'm not going to be handed this job? I think that's a lot of fears a lot of doctors have when the thinking of us being doctors and helping other people is that we should just sign this contract so we can move on to what we were trained to do, which is to help others. And I think it's helping doctors realize that actually that is not just the case. You have a lot more power. Literally, the healthcare system can't operate without doctors seeing patients. And so when you're looking at a contract, I think it's more than just about money, but it's about a good life, work-life harmony and balance too, right? So maybe this one place isn't giving you the absolute top number involved in your salary, but they're offering all of these other incentives like administrative time that you potentially could negotiate for, or, longer patient visits or flexibility in your schedule that all contributes to your well-being when you're at that particular institution. I think the whole package is important to consider.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense. Now, with you guys working together, Peter, I want to ask you, because what I found is I've talked to now hundreds of doctors, most of them running their own business in some sort of way. And what I found is that usually the reason that they decide to start a business revolves off of a story or a culmination of stories that they've experienced in their life. What happened in your specific life to the point where you're like, you know what, I need to start helping other doctors with this kind of system?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. And so in my case, I'm now 10 years out since medical school. I've been in independent practice now for 7. I'm clinic director at a rural, federally qualified health center, working, providing care for people who have Medicare, Medicaid. So the vast majority of the patients have a lot of socioeconomic determinants of health. And so I've been working in such a system now for my entire career. And it's hard, right? I mean, it's hard to want to give our best and help lift people up to have the, highest and best health that they can possibly have. But society and life is so complex. There's so many other factors that play in people's health and well-being in terms of social determinants of health, et cetera, right? That we as physicians can't do it all. And as much as we might be idealistic and want to do those things, to try to quote unquote fix, right, what's wrong, it's not possible, right? And so in my case, I can tell you that when I was in residency, I was giving my 100%, right? Which for some people might be, mine is, I get 150% of myself, right? Self-sacrificing, working exuberant numbers of hours to the point that I eventually just was burning out and not loving medicine early on in my career in residency, right? And question, is this really even right for me? Why did I go into this field? Because I have no life right now, and I felt the pain of that. I'd recovered from that for a short while, and then back in my care, when I was in my early career jobs, experienced a bout of burnout. And when I had eventually sought coaching, for me, that was the one thing that really helped me turn it around. Realized that I had a lot more agency over the way that I was thinking about the circumstances that were occurring in my life, and to take control back, right, about how I was thinking about things. Therefore, how I could then alter my actions, right, and the results that I was getting, right, to shift away from, a situation where I was just constantly burned out, drained, tired, to, working in a system that actually I enjoy, right? Like right now, I love my job. It's hard, right? As there's still a lot of sacrifice. I do get home late sometimes still, but, eventually I've developed systems and a mindset to help overcome that burnout and make the system work for me as well, so that I can stay in medicine longer. In medicine, there's depending on what you read, right? There's financial blogs out there that promote FIRE, right? Financial independence, retire early, right? You're burned out from medicine, right? Work hard, make money, save, get out of medicine as fast as you can, right? That's the narrative that's out there. And I remember at one point, I bought into that. I was like, man, I got to just grind until I can just get out of this. And then eventually I learned to reprioritize a little bit and say, I really love medicine. I want to do this for as long as I can, but I want to do it more on my terms. And that's when I became inspired to start working with doctors, helping them overcome burnout, through coaching and develop a sense of their priorities and what they wanted to make important to them, and prioritize that as they move forward in their career in a number of different ways, whether it's through, perhaps setting more firm boundaries on working, maybe a reduced schedule, or getting admin time, or developing more efficient charting in clinic management systems for efficiency. Contract negotiations, right? Negotiating that early on in your contract, because if you don't, then you, as a physician, can be at higher risk for burning out if you don't start thinking about those things early. And so that's why Cynthia and I decided to join forces together, because in my case, right, I had a number of different early career docs I'd worked with that sort of naturally came to me because I'd helped them to negotiate their contracts and advocate for their worth. And as Cynthia did too. And we met and said, hey, why don't we do this together? If you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. Let's do this together. You got a similar idea. Let's empower as many docs as we can to help them get their worth and create a career that's sustainable for them.
That's amazing. That's actually really cool to see you go through that. And what I find is that if there's this thing called the sunk cost fallacy, which the listeners may or may not be aware of, but the idea that I have invested so much time, energy, and money into something that I can never give it up. I just have to keep doing it. And you talk about that with a physician. I mean, going through, dedicating your life, spending a ton of money, like probably the single hardest career to get away from if you actually want to. So you have two options, right? It's either you stay in unhappy, you leave, or you find peace and continue forward and find love in what you're doing. And I think that's the key. And it seems like that's what you guys are helping doctors do, which I think is so, so valuable. Cynthia, what about you? Take me to that moment where you were like, you know what? I got to make a change.
Yeah, there were so many moments that I think culminated in my decision to eventually leave my previous full-time academic physician job at a residency program. And I think it was probably a combination of many things. One, at that time, I wasn't as deep in the coaching realm as I am now. So I'm sure there was a component of mindset involved with that. But ultimately, I think it's also about finding a place where your values and the institutional values align and your common goals and mission are the same. I think that's where doctors are truly happy. And you look at, I think, the mission and goals of many institutions. And while they are, I would say, artificially, superficially the same, we're helping, patients. I think when you're looking a little bit deeper, there could be a lot more undertones involved. And so I think that was also part of the reason. As I got, when I had my kid, actually, when I got pregnant, was really when I started looking at and reprioritizing my whole life and what my personal life mission and goals were. And it wasn't necessarily all around work. When you start having a family, things change a little bit. And so really looking at it from that context and the current phase of life that I am right now, which I have a little 2-year-old that I do want to spend time with and watch her grow up, and flexibility, autonomy right now is really important to me, and that might change when she's a little bit older and in school, but that was a choice and decision I decided to make for myself at that time to fit in with my values and priorities during this current phase of my life. And so I think that's also important to keep in mind also, is when you're looking at contracts and you're looking at work like life harmony and it's what's working with you and your priorities right now, keeping those things at the top of your list. So for a lot of physician mothers with young kids, flexibility probably is going to be extremely important. Being able to drop off your kids and pick your kid up for school and working, that into your contract. I think being clear and upfront with whoever you're talking with and negotiating with. Me wanting to work part-time, for example, is another one, just based around wanting to spend more time at home with my family. So those are all really important things to consider, I think, when you're looking at a contract. When we talk with our clients, the first thing we talk to them is like, what are your values? Because then we want to base everything around that. And again, like I said before, when your values, the institutional values, or whoever you're working with, your employer's values align and they're agreeing to work with each other, I think that's when the physicians are the happiest.
I love that. It's a good way to kind of guide the process based on those values. Now, I imagine because there's so many levers you can pull when it comes to a contract, right? There's so many different factors. But Peter, what if a doctor didn't find you guys soon enough, or just didn't know they just got in, they just signed the contract, they were stoked that they had a job and making some money, but got to the point where they realized this isn't working for me. What are their options? Is it renegotiation? Do they have to leave? Like, where do we go from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that obviously that's a good question, but I think that it also very much depends on the contract terms that they've just signed and how far they are into that contract. And there's, things
Tell me more
like
about that.
Yeah, so a lot. It depends on where you go and what job you've got. But a lot of times, let's just say like if someone started a job, their first job out of residency, and maybe they were offered like a moving stipend, relocation sort of assistance, or a sign-on bonus, or offered a retention bonus, is for staying with the organization after a certain number of years. Contracts vary widely in terms of like the terms of those things, and obviously so do sort of like termination clauses in terms of like how much notice is needed to be given, et cetera, on either side of the coin, whether it's the employer or the employee. And so like, I don't think there's any like one specific answer that I can give you, because contracts do vary so widely and there's things like non-compete clauses too involved. And so, I think that everything in life is negotiable. And if we don't at least have that mindset, right, then we're not going to be even attempting as individuals to negotiate. And so I think it really depends on the individual circumstances of a particular physician and what the nature of the contract is that they sign to be able to renegotiate and on what time frame. And so the question is like, it's not a question of if it's negotiable, it's also kind of like more of like a when can it be renegotiated. And so like sometimes you got to wait until, some time has passed, maybe a year or 2 or 3, depending on things that have been written into a contract to be able to sort of renegotiate anything. And it can sometimes feel like golden handcuffs a little bit for people if they sign contracts where they get sort of moving stipend, relocation bonuses, sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses, right? That have a time frame on there that you get in and you're working there for a year, right? But you signed a contract that said, if you leave before the 3-year mark, you got to pay back this sign-on bonus, on a prorated basis, or all of it, and you get none of it, right? All those are factors that come into play. And if a doctor is burned out at a job after a year, but they've got a term that says they gotta stay there for at least 3 years, otherwise they got to return that bonus, then yeah, it can feel a little bit like sort of golden handcuffs a little bit there. And so obviously, right, there's so many factors at play because there's a shortage of doctors in the country and there's such a high need everywhere, right? Places of employment are looking to do what they can to try to retain physicians and employees and staff, support staff too. And so, yeah, like when they give contracts like that, they'll put in terms and timeframes to try to help retain people, right, as much as they possibly can.
For me, that seems like a red flag if someone's trying to retain you through pretty much handcuffing you to the contract versus being like, hey, I want my doctors to have agency and I want them to want to be here. Is there ever, if this is to either of you, and maybe it's someone you've worked with or a story that you've heard where they've told you that they are truly just like locked in and they felt like they had no agency and they just had to kind of stick it out?
All right. Could you repeat the question? Are you asking?
I'm asking, do you guys have any stories or any cases where you have seen or reviewed someone's contract and you felt like, oh, wow, you really are handcuffed right now and you don't have any agency? Or is there always some avenue that they can look at?
No, I think it's all about how you feel and what you're willing to negotiate, compromise, and or give up and what's important to you. There are plenty of contracts out there that are, I would say anything longer than 2 years is a really hard sell for me when you're looking at contract terms, because if you're just miserable at a place and you have a 3-year contract, that's a long time to be miserable at. A lot of those kinds of contracts are tied with amazing bonuses, right? But at the end of the day, if you're so miserable, is it worth that money? And I think that's a hard question, every individual will have to answer for themselves. My personal opinion is always going to be no, because for us, time is the most important commodity for every single human on this earth and including doctors. And it's just not worth being miserable at a place, even if the money is good, because you can always make more money. There's a million different ways you can make more money, but you're never going to get the time back that you could be spent enjoying yourself and your just limited time on this earth. It's my own personal opinion. And so when you sign a contract, that's one thing. I would say a big learning point is look at your exit clause of what it looks like potentially at the end of your relationship with that place, because most doctors do leave. And so what would that look like if you were going to leave? You want to make sure you give yourself a good out too.
Do you guys have any real world examples? Like Peter, do you have any real world examples where that may have come true for either you or a client?
Specifically in terms of feeling like you're trapped and you can't leave?
Yeah, and then you had to guide them one way or the other.
With clients that I've worked with in the past, not specifically, but I will say on in social media doctor groups, I do see posts about this kind of thing pretty frequently, right? And there's social media doctor groups that have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of doctors in them. And so I haven't worked with anybody specifically where they've been the terms of their contract have been so bad that they were just trapped. But yes, I've seen it out there, sort of in the world in terms of like social media, what people are asking for guidance on out in social media. I would say for me, like in my own personal experience, I remember, one of my early career jobs, because I changed jobs 3 times early on due to life circumstances where, my wife and family and I had to move from one city to another for my wife to be able to attend a postdoctoral fellowship program after completing her PhD, right? And so we didn't really know where we're going to end up on a more long-term basis at that time. And I remember I had a relocation bonus, if you will, part of a contract. And the term of it was that if I left the organization prior to 1 year, then I would have to be responsible for paying that back. And so I remember actually burning out a little bit in that job and wanting to change. And I eventually did change. And so I felt a little bit like I had a little bit of a handcuff there and couldn't leave before that 1 year. I could have truly left if I really wanted to. Yes, I would have owed some money. In the end, I ended up deciding to stick it out just past that year and then left and moved on. But yeah, so I think to answer your question, yes, it exists in terms of people feeling like they're a little bit trapped and have some golden handcuffs. No, I have not personally worked with people who've had it where it's been an extenuating, circumstance where they're trapped in there for years and years and years and can't get out.
For sure. It's ultimately going to come. You have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is my continuation in this program worth the amount of suffering that I'm doing? And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's I'm just going to push through and I'm going to finish it off. But Cynthia, I saw you lift your finger. Did you have a point that you wanted to make or a story you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I did work with, I have a colleague of mine who I won't say which medical institution this colleague was employed by, but it was a very similar circumstance where she was not happy at that institution, ended up deciding to leave early and breaking her contract early, and also deciding that it was worth it to her to pay back the remaining portion of what was initially promised to her as part of her sign-on contract. And for her, it was worth it. I know we're all on our journeys, but I think it's always a learning point in terms of if that has happened to you once, what will you look for and what will you be aware of the next time you come across a similar situation? Ultimately, I think she was happier, much happier. And in fact, I know she was because she's told me that she was much happier that she made that decision.
I love that. I feel like it's probably a hard decision at the time, but majority of the people that do decide to break their contracts probably in the end feel that it was worth it because it pushed them that far to make that decision. Okay. One last thing that I really want to cover is salary transparency. So one of my friends, Tyler Polk, he actually started the platform called SalaryDoctor.com. And the whole idea is to make sure that doctors can understand transparency of how much their colleagues are actually making and being very clear and transparent about it. For you, Peter, if someone comes in there and they don't actually have any idea what their colleagues are, how do you help them benchmark this and figure out if they're actually being compensated fairly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe that transparency is definitely important, amongst physicians so that they do have leverage and are aware of what colleagues are making. Because without that information, it's impossible to know. And so there's so many doctors who come out of training in their early careers, have no idea about these numbers and whatnot. And there's such a variety of different offers, both intra and interspecialty, and the gender wage gap is also very real in medicine. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of transparency. There are a number of different, benchmarking sort of sets out there that are available to people. I don't really necessarily want to name names because we don't have any specific affiliations with them or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, there's data that's out there that can be purchased and used to help leverage and negotiate. I always am a very big fan of people having multiple offers also because that gives you real-time data sort of on what the different ranges and offers are that are out there, and also gives leverage to an individual when they're negotiating. I don't know if Cynthia, if you've got something that you wanted to kind of piggyback on or
and I think in general, salary transparent, everyone within a system that has salary transparency tends to actually be happier because they understand why it is they are being paid a certain amount and they understand what it is needed to, let's say, move up, get a raise, or why their colleague might be paid more or less than them. From an institutional perspective, they tend not to want to provide that, because if you are doing this individual negotiation per contract, you're going to obviously, it's not based on the amount of salary you're paid. It's arbitrary. It's not, there's no set standard across the board for everyone. And so historically, I think it's been shown that salary transparency just announced, and then this is not always shown in the medical industry. I think this has been shown in other large tech industries that all the employers tend to be much happier.
Mm-hmm, totally.
I have a little piggyback on this too, actually. At least in the state of California, that's where I'm located, and Cynthia's also located. But there's state law that salary sort of ranges do have to be publicized on job postings, right? And so, like, if you look at a job posting for physician job in the state of California, right, oftentimes on that post somewhere, right, is oftentimes in small type at the very bottom or something bizarre. You can see what the ranges are that are available basically at an institution. And so obviously that does depend on the state in which one resides, right? And California is probably a little bit of a unicorn in that regard compared to other states in the country. But it's fun to throw that out there because it's relevant.
I did see that, and we can always count on, I think all three of us live in California. But these employers are always going to find a way around that. You know, they're gonna figure out a number that they can come up with a calculation for with that. If there is a doctor or anyone who is currently feeling like they're stuck in a contract or doesn't know how to advocate for themselves, what do you want to say to them?
Oh, that's a great question. Everything is negotiable, right? And if you believe that you've got the power to negotiate, then you can. And you got nothing to lose by at least attempting. And depending on where you're applying for a job, some places are going to be more valuable and willing to negotiate than others. But I would say try, right? Don't just accept an offer for what it is, without sort of going further and attempting, because you're setting yourself up for non-success. I don't want to say failure, but non-success. If you just take an offer at face value without attempting to negotiate.
Should always try, right?
Always try. You got nothing to lose. And if the worst they can say is no, and you're still stuck in the exact same position you are now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then Cynthia, for you, same question. Someone's listening to this, they feel like they don't have any agency. What do you want to say to them?
I think you are unique and you embody all the skills that you have, and they're amazing skills. I say approach every negotiation like you're ready to walk away, because you can take those skills anywhere and any job, anywhere in the world. This is one job, and chances are you probably will find another job that will be a great fit that you will love if and when the terms are right for you. And so just approaching negotiation with that mindset, I think, can feel very differently than thinking that you have to sell yourself to match the position. I kind of think it should be the other way around. The position should sell themselves to match your skills. If they really want you, they will accommodate your requests because they see the value that you are bringing to their institution.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, I know that this has been super helpful. I can tell you that there is a large community that needs to hear these kind of things. And so I can really just say thank you for the work that you guys are doing. Not only are you helping people feel better about the position they're in, but also help keeping people in the healthcare system, which we need more than ever. So thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. I'll just add on to, if you're looking for help, we are available. You can reach out to us. Is it okay? Can I tell
Please,
where they can find us?
Mm-hmm.
We are at www.physiciancontractnegotiation.com. We got a program out there that's called Get Your Worth, a contract negotiation for early career physicians. And we'll be, launching another cohort in the fall of this year. And so you can always reach out to us there. So
amazing. All right. Well, make sure you put that in the show notes. And yeah, if you need help, make sure to reach out to them.
Thanks so much
again
for having us today. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the MedStory podcast, where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm your host, Spencer Luck, with a special thanks to our executive producer, Shina May. Our music comes from Blue Dot Sessions and the Descript Audio Library. The MedStory podcast is made possible by MedStory Studios and listeners like you. So if you'd like to support us, please leave a review. It means more than you know. And if you have a story to share or want to produce a podcast of your own, reach out to us at info@medstorymedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode.